A couple of nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night to two flashes of white light in quick succession, and I had a sense that time had passed in between those two flashes. What I did, what I think most people do in those sort of situations, I downplayed it and I thought, I don't want to deal with whatever that was. I don't want to accept that something paranormal has just happened, brushed it off, and then went to sleep. But the next day, I woke up, and as I was scrolling through my phone, I saw a video about someone sharing a alien abduction story that they had, and it sounded eerily similar to the experience that I had had the night before. So it led me to this question: was this experience that I've had a sleep anomaly, some sort of brain glitch, or was it something stranger? Had I been abducted by aliens? So I did a bit of an investigation off the back of that, and this video is showing you both sides of that investigation. Welcome to Field Notes. There was this uneasy feeling of a presence and a sense that time had passed in between these flashes. And I also noticed that I was hot to the touch in the moment. I was sweating, which was unusual for me. And the strange part of it was the very next day, I just couldn't shake the lingering feeling that this event had some sort of deeper meaning to it. So even though I had pushed this thought to the back of my mind, it still lingered with me into the next day. I had a conversation with my wife about it, but the energy of the conversation that I was having was more to downplay what happened. I was trying to convince myself that it was nothing paranormal, it was just a strange hallucination. And I was really trying to convince myself almost like it didn't happen, almost like I didn't experience these two flashes of light, and that there was nothing strange that happened that evening, and then we could just move on with our lives. And I ended up striking up a conversation with a friend, and I felt the urge of telling him about this experience. But again, in the back of my mind was like, don't bring it into the forefront of your imagination, just let this be. And apparently that's a very common experiences tend to have, where they have this sense of something strange happening to them, and then because they don't want to be deemed as crazy, they push it to the back of their mind and they think, I'm just going to move on with the rest of my life. And it's only much later when they start to contextualize what's happened that they realize there's something strange, or they've been a part of an odd phenomenon. Now, I was very much in that sense where I was trying to push it to the back of my mind, and that was until I came across this Reddit post as I was just scrolling on my phone a couple of hours later in the morning. The video was of a Van Halen member who was explaining his alien abduction encounter on the Howard Stern show. And although scrolling past this video felt like a synchronicity to me in the moment, I did have to realize that when it comes to technology, our social media feeds are very, very good now at understanding what we think about, what we care about, what we're interested in the minute. So even though this video seemed like the right video for me to see at the time to put me on this path to making this video, I also have to respect the fact that I have been researching UFOs, aliens, the paranormal activities around these things for a recent video. So it isn't completely uncommon that a video about the experience that I just had the night before would be arriving on my phone a couple of hours later. Although it feels like synchronicity, you could say that maybe this is more just a coincidence than one that is entirely meaningful. And it's a very strange thing because I feel like technology and synchronicity sometimes is weirdly tied together, and we'll notice that more and more as we go into the future. And I'll play a couple of clips of this Van Halen star and his abduction story now.
I had a UFO experience. My room was white. I mean, I was like, I couldn't see anything. It was a complete whiteout. And I woke up and it was black.
It turns out that science does have an explanation for some of these phenomenon, and they're called hypnopompic hallucinations. And it's described as visual distortions where you have shadows, or you see movements, or perceive silhouettes in a state of sleeping to wakefulness. And I've had my own experiences of these things in the past, very strange ones in my early 20s. And some of the most prominent examples of that is when I woke up one day and saw a goblin on my table. And then a split second later, I realized it was a Pringles can. And then there was another time where I woke up and I saw one of Terence McKenna's Clockwork Elves hovering above my head. And then a split second later, it turns out it was just a lamp at the bedside table at the hotel that I was staying in. So, one common feature that I had around that is I was reading a Terence McKenna book the night before that happened. So, obviously, the influence of Terence McKenna had infected my mind. So, when I was transitioning from sleeping to wakefulness, I was more prone to seeing something that was fresh in my imagination from the inspiration I was taking from that book. So these hallucinations can be quite common, and they tend to happen when people are going from that sleep state into a wakeful state. And even though they are typically harmless hallucinations, they are very vivid, and in the moment they can feel very unsettling. I mean, just like the banner image that you can see, that if you wake up in the middle of the night and perceive a shadowy figure or a presence in the room, that's going to make you feel on edge unless you're a complete psychopath. So, investigating this a little bit further, I came across something called exploding head syndrome, which sounds absolutely terrifying. But the good news is your head doesn't actually explode into 1,000 pieces. It's in reference to your sensory systems getting maxed out for a moment. Now, people often report bright white flashes, almost like you are turning the luminance settings up on your TV or your phone, like you're cranking the brightness up to the absolute maximum settings. And because our brains are essentially rendering reality for us, we have a set of parameters in here that have max settings. And it makes sense from a visual aspect that if you cranked the luminous values all the way to the top, all you would see is white, and vice versa. If you turn all those settings down, you don't have any light, you're going to see black. It just tends to be how the world works, as far as my understanding goes. What was fascinating to me, though, is that this also happens with other sensory inputs. So it happens with sound as well. So sometimes people report electrical zaps, crashes, and you hear bangs, sounds that aren't real, that they're not getting from the outside environment, but that are happening inside of the mind. And the prevailing theory, at least the one that I've come across when I've been digging into this, is that when the brain is coming back online from sleep, it's rebooting incorrectly, and that can cause these distortions or these moments of maxed out settings that people perceive as bright lights or loud bangs. So ultimately, if these things are happening, the question that you end up asking is, why do these things happen? And interestingly enough, it's tied to stress, physiological stress and psychological stress in pairing. If you have these things out of balance, then it's more likely that you're going to have these sorts of sleep anomalies. Now, it can be physiological stress, as in you're exhausted, you've just worn your body out, you're overheated. But from a neurological standpoint as well, if you're experiencing anxiety, depression, or extreme emotional states that are going unresolved, then this can also lead you to have these sorts of sleep anomalies. So the way that I interpret this is, if you're failing to get the basics right, if you don't have a good sleep routine, if you're not eating a healthy, balanced diet, if you're not getting enough exercise, if you're not hydrating enough, if you're drinking too much caffeine, if you're smoking, if you're abusing substances, then this is going to cause you to have more of these sorts of sleep anomalies. There are other false light phenomenon called Phosphenes, and the reason why Phosphenes are interesting is they don't require any external light entering the eye for you to be able to see the light. It's all manifested in the mind. And these are often triggered by migraines, although more obscurely they can be triggered by electrical currents, magnetic fields, or even triggering sounds as well. And people often report these as flashes of white light. Another interesting phenomenon linked to alien abductions is sleep paralysis. And this is something that I unfortunately have a lot of experience with. Back in my early to mid 20s, I used to get sleep paralysis quite often, and it's very unsettling when you wake up in the middle of the night to see a creature above you screaming or doing like body contortions, and yeah, it's not particularly something that you enjoy seeing in the moment. I had a couple of repeating themes in my experiences with sleep paralysis, which tended to be I would wake up or I would feel like I've woke up in my room, and there would be this unsettling feeling that something wasn't quite right. One example that I have is I woke up one night and I saw that the window was open. I went over, I closed the window, I went to the bathroom, I got a glass of water from the tap, I went back to sleep, got back in bed, passed out, only to wake up again and notice that the window was open. Thinking that was peculiar, I went over and I closed the window again, went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, got back in bed and tried to fall asleep. Then I woke up a third time, and that's when I started to panic. And I asked myself, am I dreaming or is this reality? So I would go to the lights, I would flick on the lights, they wouldn't work. I would go over to a clock and try read the clock, but wouldn't be able to understand the time. Little things that would help me understand that maybe I was still asleep, but the panic would start to build and the stress would start to build because in my history of these sort of sleep experiences, it always ended up with a loud, horrifying sound or a tremendously creepy visual to shock me awake. And I used to hate that feeling of being shocked awake, and I would do everything to try and stay away from that in the moment. But you would often hear screams, the sound of monsters roaring, loud bangs, explosions, and then you would see all sorts of horrific things that would eventually bring you out of that state. The one that I remember is the Swamp Bride, is the only way that I can describe it. But I saw all sorts of horrible things that I don't want to remind myself of because I don't want to set myself up to have more of these events in the future. But the underlying theme tends to be the same. You wake up with a sense of dread. Some instances you feel like you can't move your body, and it's because your physical brain is still asleep and your mind, your dreaming mind, is still very active. So as you start to come to consciousness, you get this overwhelming sense of pressure on your chest that you can't move. And it makes sense that if you're in a state of panic and you feel like you're being held down against your will, that your mind would manifest creatures and entities that seem quite evil, demonic, horrible, rather than something that's very friendly and happy and wanting to help you out. Now, I was having these sorts of experiences before I really dug into the alien abduction narrative, which why it was fascinating to me when I discovered that it all follows the same themes. People often report lying in bed in a sort of half asleep, half awake state when they get this flash of light and all of a sudden they're interacting with alien beings or they feel like they're someone else, only to get a flash and be back in their room, hot, sweaty, gross, like I was the other night, to be fair. And again, it's all the same things. It's that white flash of light, it's paralysis, it's fear, it's a sense of a presence in the room that is usually uneasy, although I have heard that people have positive encounters with these entities as well, or it shifts to be more positive. But in all of my sleep paralysis encounters, that was never the case. And yeah, it just seems that modern science is linking a lot of these alien abduction encounters with this sleep paralysis phenomenon that can be explained by the human mind. But if we lean into the more paranormal aspects of these encounters, then Diana Pazulska's work is very interesting to reflect upon because she suggests that when people have these anomalous experiences, they often do downplay them. It's like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, when I had this double flash of light, I didn't immediately want to speak about it with anyone, and only in the sense to downplay the experience because I had this sense of fear that I didn't understand what was happening to me. And I almost didn't want to know because I was scared that my understanding of reality could be challenged, and that made me feel anxious and stressed out in the moment. So it makes sense that when people have these strange paranormal experiences, they're less likely to project it into the world because typically, if you can't explain why something is the way it is, that can cause a sort of stress at times. And my experience here is interesting because even though I downplayed it, the thought lingered And the only reason you're getting this video today is because a couple of hours later that morning, I scrolled past a video about something that happened that was incredibly similar to my own experience. Now, was me scrolling across that video a couple of hours after the experience a synchronicity, or was it purely the algorithm just understanding me so well that it knew it could offer up a piece of content that would be meaningful for me in the moment? Because that's what social media and technology is ultimately designed to do in these aspects of life. So, was I abducted by aliens, or was it simply a hypnopompic hallucination? Unfortunately, this time, I think I'm going to have to side on the fact that it's probably a brain glitch. After the presentation, all the evidence that we've seen, it just makes it very difficult for me to believe that I had a truly paranormal experience with this one. It's not to diminish other people's experiences, but my own thoughts and feelings on it is that there's a scientific and neurological explanation for the sleep anomalies that we have in these transitioning states. And again, what is ultimately fascinating to me is that we have this render engine in our minds that can manifest whole realities when we dream, and that sometimes you get these artifacts from your dream state that flow into waking reality. And it's kind of creepy to think about that. If even you have that for a moment, it makes you question what reality is sometimes from a visual component. If you can see something, a inanimate object, and it can shift into something else, if your brain can manifest that. And at the very end of this, I just wonder if this is all common knowledge. It's not something that I understood before I went digging. So I'm curious to know, did you find it useful? Did you know this information already? Do you still think alien encounters are real? Is there a sleep paralysis connection that I am missing? UFOs have been a bit of a special interest for me over the last couple of years, and I recently made a video covering the vastness of the topic, trying to get to a understanding of what the phenomenon really is. And I'll leave a link to it up above so you can check that out. If you've enjoyed this video, this other video is a much more polished version of the ideas that I've had around the topic. If you have enjoyed the new format today, it's something new that I'm trying as I'm beginning to balance working life with YouTube a little bit better. And yeah, if you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.